Welcome to Focus on Faculty Impact, a moment with Dr. Eugenia Mora-Flores, presented by the USC Rossier School of Education. Now, please welcome our host, a 2017 graduate of USC Rossier's MAT program, current manager of Stewardship and Development Operations at USC Rossier, Kellen Scanlon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's conversation. We are so glad you have decided to join us to hear about the impact of Dr. Eugenia Mora-Flores. Eugenia is a professor of clinical education and chair of the Master of Arts in Teaching program at the USC Rossier School of Education. She teaches courses on first and second language acquisition, Latino culture, and in literacy development for elementary and secondary students. Eugenia was named USC's MAT Professor of the Year in 2016 and 2018, received USC's Teaching Excellence Award in 2018, and received the 2018 Community Achievement Award, which recognizes professors who have made meaningful contributions to the education of students of color and/or who identify as LGBTQ. To get more insight into Eugenia's background, let's take a moment to watch this short video.
My 8th graders struggled in Spanish. I placed a series of bilingual poems about growing up Latino in the U.S. on their desks. As they walked around, they sat at the desk of a poem they liked. Andre, a brilliant problem student as the school had identified him, stood up abruptly. "Miss, I don't understand. This is the first time anyone has ever taught me about my culture, my people. Ser Dominicano. In school. Thank you." As a child born to immigrant parents from Mexico and raised in a white middle-class neighborhood, I always lived with a dichotomy of my Mexican self and my successful, educated self. Not that they couldn't be one and the same, but so many moments kept defining for me where I belonged. Or didn't. Because I was Mexican. Every year at Christmas, my family celebrated Las Posadas, a celebration of the birth of Jesus. I remember always hoping that I would get to be the group that stayed in the house to sing, so the neighbors wouldn't see me. When I was in graduate school at an Ivy League university, I sat in a classroom where I'd spent days raising my hand to answer the professor's questions. But even when no one else was raising their hands, she never called on me. Finally, the guy next to me raised his hand, and when called on, as he usually was, he looked at me and said, "Go ahead, you deserve a turn." I became a professor of language, literacy, and culture. I also came to learn that I shouldn't have made it through a doctoral program nor become a full professor at a prestigious university. My parents had limited formal education. People like me didn't belong in graduate school. I still question myself often. Do I belong here? Do others think I belong? Is this where I want to belong? Recently, I finished office hours with a young Latina, and as I was walking her to the door, she turned and said, "Can I hug you?" And as she hugged me, she said, "Thank you for being you here."
Joining Eugenia for today's conversation are two alumni whose lives were transformed through their connection with Eugenia inside as well as outside of the classroom. Carolina Chavez is currently an assistant principal at Griffin Avenue Elementary in the Los Angeles Unified School District. In addition to her role as assistant principal, she works with the UCLA math program as a lead teacher during professional development. She is the daughter of two Mexican immigrant parents. Carolina graduated from the University of California, Los Angeles as the first in her family to attend a four-year university. After graduating from UCLA, she was a part of the first cohort in the Masters of Arts MAT program at the University of Southern California in 2005. She also attended California State University, Northridge, where she received a second master's degree and an administrative credential. Carolina is dedicated to the greater impact of student achievement in underrepresented communities. She strives to serve our communities with the highest level of attention and care towards their needs. Dr. Cassandra Villa is currently an instructional coach, English, and AP research teacher at Warren High School in Downey Unified. She serves on the Human Relations Council Steering Committee, where she serves to collaborate with other colleagues to build a district equity plan focused on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion at DUSD. In the past, she has also worked in South Central and Watts as a Common Core implementation coach, department chair, and an English teacher. She is a first-generation college student from Pacoima, California. She went to UC Riverside for undergrad, then went on to be part of the Rossier family as a 2009 MAT graduate and past recipient of the Leo Buscaglia Scholarship. She pursued and earned her PhD in 2017 from Claremont Graduate University with a focus on urban leadership, and currently serves as an adjunct professor at Pepperdine University's MAT program, supporting pre-service teachers and learning alongside new teachers in the field. Her professional and personal mission is to provide safe and equitable spaces in school communities through learning and leading with other critical educators in the field and carrying the torch others have left for us to continue.
Thank you, Callan.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. To get the conversation started, we've prepared a few structured questions, and we will take questions from the audience a bit later on. So the first question is for Eugenia. What would you consider to be the core values of your approach to working with MAT students at Rossier?
Okay, thanks, Callan. Sorry, I keep wiping my eyes. That was pictures of family we've lost this year, or in some of those images. So I didn't realize, I forgot those pictures were there. So to see family that I've lost during COVID was a little tough. So thank you for being here. I'm just really grateful that you came tonight. I see so many familiar students and then fellow faculty. So for me in MAT, one of the things that I think it connects to what the story was about, is when I teach my courses and I work with my students, I really want them to know who I am in my authentic self, and for them to also, come to the table with who they are and the kind of teacher they want to be. I draw a lot from my experience as an English learner. So my passion in language and literacy comes from the experiences I had as a student that was navigating language and literacy and English and maintaining my Spanish and my heritage. And so I try to teach my classes by building a mindset for my students that the work we do as teachers makes a world of a difference. I share a lot about my personal stories and how teachers were so instrumental in every step of the way in my education. And that as much as my parents could offer and the information that they could share, it wasn't parallel to what my teachers were able to provide for me. So I approach my classes by starting off with this understanding and feeling that all students are capable of reaching with the goals that they've set for themselves and high levels of achievement. And I try to draw from who I am and the population I represent to remind them that, regardless of our backgrounds and our upbringings, that there's potential, and we have to find the way to bring that out of students and to guide them in our classes. So it's kind of where I draw from.
Thank you, Eugenia. So Cassandra and Carolina, take us back to the first time you met Eugenia. What were your first impressions?
Well, if it's okay, I'll go first. So back 15 years ago, it's actually a very vivid memory for me. It was the first time a professor at USC was calling roll and could pronounce my name correctly. And until we got together for this, I didn't realize the impact that had on me. because it was that idea of being seen. It was that idea that she knew who I was and where I came from. And your name is so tied to your roots, right? And it makes me, when I'm at my school sites, ensure that I make every effort possible to say my students' names correctly, their last names correctly, get that accent as best as I can, especially if they have a different language than mine. And I share my value in making sure that they help me get it right. Right. And I'll go away and I'll try and I'll listen to other versions of it online so that I can try. But, you know, she really had that moment stand out for me because up until then, I had not had a single professor who could.
I think just to carry on and add on to Carolina's point, it was one of the first times that I saw somebody who looked like me in this space. Back in 2008, I was, fresh out of undergrad, and I was determined to be a teacher, and I was determined to be an English teacher. And coming into her space and in her room, I remember in her second language acquisition course, she made everybody line up. And we did this activity lining up, and she gave examples about her daughter and how she was acquiring language. And at that time, her daughter was 5 and now she's like 15. But in that moment, I was just like, how powerful is it to see somebody who looks like me in this space, a doctora, a wife, a mom, and an academic mother. She was very mothering to us in that space where I felt like I was talking to my tia about, scholarly practice and lingo. And I felt how at home and at peace do I feel in this space where if she can make a classroom feel this way, I know I can make my future classroom feel that same way, a sense of cariño, and in a way that was also rigorous and thoughtful and really authentic. And I think that really propelled my own thinking and my own practice in the classroom as a teacher and lifelong learner, and how I learn alongside my students, learning with them and not just teaching at them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I know we have other questions, but when you were sharing that, Cassandra, it reminded me of, so as a mom, I have 4 children, and my son, who, he just kind of goes to school. He doesn't really tell me much. And at the beginning of this year, he said, "Mom, I have a Mexican teacher." And I was like, "Oh, how do you know he's Mexican?" "Well, I think he's Mexican." And I said, "Okay, well, tell me more about that." And he goes, "No, Mom, I've never," and he's an immigrant. "Like, I've never, that's like us, Mom. Like, we're Mexican immigrants." And I said, "Yeah, mijo, we are." And he was just, and it was his history class. And he was just so excited about that. And he kept saying, "Oh, I gotta go, Mom. It's time for my Mexican history class." And I said, "Well, it's not Mexican history, but it is your teacher is his heritage, his descent is of Mexican descent, and he was an immigrant from Mexico." But I mean, it was funny because this is a 7th grader who just kind of would, like, I'm going to my distance learning class, I'm going. And when it came time from history, he was just like, "Oh, I gotta go because it's my Mexican teacher, my Mexican history class." So, I mean, it's as a mom, like, to see the connections, and whether it was connecting because of a common heritage, connecting because of common interests, connecting because of common struggles, common experiences. To me, it was just the fact that he found a connection. Right? Like, he found that connection. And so I'm reminded of, as teachers and as educators, just the opportunities that we have to connect with students, and realizing that those connections can mean so much. I mean, just hearing both of you talk about how many years ago it was that we first got to work together, and that those things resonated with you, just is really inspiring for me, because I feel like that the connections that I try to make with students is such an important part of my work. So thank you for that. Callan, I didn't know if Callan, you were coming on with the new question.
I think, okay, I'm back. Sorry, my box, it went off and then it came back. So, okay, I'm back now. And, thank you guys for sharing. So I guess the next question is both for Cassandra and Carolina again. How would you say your relationship with Eugenia has evolved over time, and what impact has it had on both your professional and personal life?
I definitely, one of the first things that comes to mind is I was a 3rd-year teacher, and I saw Doctora Flores, in the downtown lobby at Green Dot Public Schools. That was one of the charter management organizations that I worked with. And I was like, wait a minute, I know her. And I remember running up to her and giving her like a big hug. And she's like, oh my gosh, like, how have you been? It's been a few years. And I just wanted to update her so much. And like over the years, sending her an email, like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And just in those moments where I was excited to connect with her and let her know about my life, that I was continuing the things that she believed I could do. That was really critical for me. I was excited to share with her. She made it that comforting space where I wanted to, fill her in on my life. And seeing her as like, a new teacher, and then now on the other side as a doctora myself, it feels very humbling to be in this space and to share this space with critical educators like Carolina and Eugenia, because there's more of us out there. And it's so powerful to see, strong leaders like us doing the work. And so I think for me, it was life-changing. I felt affirmed and valued. And seeing her in that lobby, I'll never forget how excited I was. Like, I just dropped everything and I just ran to her and gave her a hug. And it just inspired me to keep growing and keep moving and to keep carrying that torch.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah. And I mean, I want to piggyback on that feeling. I mean, I think I've always had that feeling with Eugenia and that comfortableness. And it's funny because I always refer to her Dr. Mora-Flores. And it's not just because that's how I met her, but in our culture, it's like, I would never call somebody just Jane, right? I would call them Mrs. whatever. And so the fact that she's a doctor, I always try to make sure that I value that within our space. But really our relationship was, the foundation of it was really all about accessibility. My access to her from the moment I stepped into her classroom felt a little limitless in terms of like, I think I saw her and I held on to her and like, I was not gonna let her go. And really our relationship became more than just in the classroom. And, as I left USC, I remember reaching out to her because I had a question about something I was teaching and I wanted to know more information. And she was just so approachable and so open to respond to me and give me advice. And then as my role evolved into an intervention coordinator, an instructional coach, and now an AP, every step of the way, she's really been there for any questions I have, or, hey, what are you up to? What are you doing? And my family has really had the luxury of building a relationship with her. My wife speaks to her just as much as I do sometimes. They meet. She's been an amazing mentor to my wife. My wife also has gotten a doctorate from USC. And so, Eugenia has really been there to help guide her on how to become an adjunct professor and how to, make that leap from an adjunct professor to a full-time professor, which is not easy. And it's not easy as a person of color to make those leaps, especially with nobody to guide you, right? Both myself and my wife are first generation educated from immigrant parents. And so there's not somebody else in my family we can turn to and say, hey, so what's next, right? And so Eugenia has kind of been our educational godmother in terms of helping us guide and ask questions, and a real genuine resource to us. And we'll meet up every so often and just chat. And it is a very social outing, but inevitably we get into the mix of, okay, what are you doing? What's next? What's the plan? How are you going to achieve that? And I'm in a coaching session before I realize it, me and my wife. And it's been quite an amazing development in our relationship, and just the role that she's played in our lives is not really something I can measure or pigeonhole.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so special to reflect on, these relationships and see how they've grown throughout the years. And, Eugenia is obviously playing, just more than the professor role for you both. So Eugenia, as on the topic of role models, who were the role models and mentors who inspired you in your educational and professional journey?
Okay, great. So I think I'll connect that back to a little bit what Carolina and Cassandra were talking about too, because I did want to, this is because I have students here, and I want to say when, Carolina and Cassandra were mentioning reaching back out and telling me how things are going. Like I'll get an email from Cassandra that says, hey, Dr. McCoy, just want to know where I'm at and what I'm doing. I do mean that. So I tell my students all the time, let me know how it's going. Let me know what you're up to. Keep me up to date. And sometimes I think, I don't know if they really believe me, and some will, but I really do mean it, because one of the things before I get to my kind of who helped me out is something Carolina mentioned, is that I feel like I didn't know who to go to for those questions and those things. And so I want to be that for my students. So if you have a question, ask me. I might not have the answer, but I can find somebody to connect you with. You know, I'll send you to Dr. Pascarella or Dr. Sally, you know, whoever I know might be somebody with the assets or the capital to know how to navigate what my students want to do. So I feel, so thank you for sharing that, because for me, the other real joy is, I was telling Cassandra and Carolina that the faculty impact for me was more about their stories. That I felt that it was about, what are they often doing? What are the things that they're doing with their students? Where have they grown in their work? Because for me, that's what impact is about. It's not so much my story, but how their stories have shown the efforts that I really try to engage in my teaching and in my practice, and seeing it realized in all their work. So I saw Ivan in here, and I saw, Cloris was a doctoral student, and then Christine, students that I've seen in other capacities. And I really do hope to hear from students and know what's happening, because then I think it brings me back to, gives purpose kind of to the work that we do. But more so, it just makes me so proud. To your point, Cassandra, I feel like a mother, like I'm so proud of my babies, and they're already grown adults with their own families, but that's how I feel. And to me, I do agree with you, Carolina. It was a bit lonely in my progress academically. My family will try to help as much as they can, but they didn't know. My dad would say to me all the time, well, why are you getting a master's degree? You're a teacher, your sister's a teacher, she didn't get one. What do you need one for? Like, there's no point. Like, why are you gonna go to New York to get a degree when your sister and you are already teaching? So there wasn't a lot of that guidance, and moving into higher education, that was a challenge for me. When I came to USC, I had been in higher ed for a couple of years, and I was only like 27 years old coming into USC. I didn't know about the higher education space. I didn't know how to navigate kind of meetings. So yeah, I sat quietly at so many meetings, didn't really say anything. I was just trying to figure out, how do things work? Do I have a voice? Will I be valued? There was a lot of second guessing myself and questioning, like, okay, should I say something? No, I'm not gonna say anything, because I don't think they want to hear what I have to say. So there was a lot of time it took me to feel that that I belonged in this place and in this space. And I did look to faculty to guide me in that. And there were probably 3, but I'll talk about 2 that were really instrumental for me. And one was Dr. Robert Rueda, who's now retired from USC. And I know that Helen and others know him, who've been here when he was here. But Dr. Rueda, he was that person that I could go to, and no question was a stupid question. Like, no question was, did you really just ask me that? You finished a doctoral program and you're at USC, you should know the answer to that. So he was this person who would just kind of say to me, just ask, let me know, what questions you have. And I felt that comfort. So just like you mentioned, Carolina, that helped me. And knowing that I didn't feel silly, like asking these questions, that somebody who's achieved what I did should feel like they should have to know those answers. And, and he would always find a way to make me feel comfortable and connect with me, kind of on a social cultural level. He'd always say, okay, what do you want to talk about? So he would find these ways. You talked about the name. He would do that too. Like, he would tease me, but tease me in a way that was showing his connection with me, that made me feel comfortable and familiar, and like, I feel safe with you. He wasn't even in our program. He wasn't part of the MAT faculty. He did some videos for me, but I knew that there was that safe place I can go to and ask him those questions. I remember at his chair, he had an endowed chair, and they had a ceremony for him. He talked about the professor who was that for him. And I had to write to him after, and I sent him an email. And I was like, Robert, the story you told about Professor so-and-so who was for you, I said, you're that for me. Like, you were that person for me. I just wanted you to know that, because I don't think they were always aware of that connection that we have and the impact that it makes. And so I wanted him to know that. I'll just do one more because I know I'm rambling, but the other one, honestly, and I know he could have been, he was controversial sometimes here, but Ray Baca pushed me. Like, Ray Baca was this presence, physical and intellectual presence, that maybe didn't always say the things everybody wanted to hear, had different perspective, but I appreciated that. Like, he had this confidence, and I said, I'm gonna have that confidence Ray has, to kind of put myself out there. And he was my kind of intellectual go-to. You know, it was like, hey, Ray, I don't know, I'm really struggling. I need to find something that helps me understand this research or this literature. He's like, got it, let me send you some things. And then he'd call me. Ray is the funniest thing, because I'll ask him a question in an email, he'll send me a bunch of articles, and then he'll call me, and we'll be on the phone for like 2 hours, where he's pretty much giving me a whole course on what I asked him about in the email. And then he would tell me, but you know, you got to think about this, you got to think about this perspective, and that's not really that, you know. So he was really critical in a way that helped me realize the way that I needed to be critical about my practice and about my scholarship and the way I approached it. So there's definitely a lot of other people along the way that helped me and made me feel like I belonged, in that I was where I needed to be and that I could be successful. But I think those two resonated with me, because I feel like it really connected with what Cassandra and Carolina were sharing about the connections that we've made.
Thank you, Eugenia. It's so wonderful to see it, you know, these relationships come full circle, you know, and have students turn into professors and teachers that want to emulate, you know, what their professors were to them. It's really wonderful. Cassandra, I know you have to leave early to teach a class for MAT students at Pepperdine, so I'd like to get this question in for you. How has your experience as a student in Eugenia's classroom influenced your teaching philosophy with MAT students?
Thank you so much. That's a great question. I think when Doctora Flores was talking about, you know, Doctora Rueda and Baca being like her person, I think in many ways she was my person at USC. And I think it was always about learning and growing in her classroom, and how to make my students feel empowered, and how using personal stories could be a springboard to critically engage in what it is that we were learning. And the ways in which she would talk to us about you know, how to support our English language learners. And it's not about, you know, watering down the rigor. It's about creating those spaces and supporting students, and like empowering and letting them know that they are affirmed and valued and brilliant. And they bring so much cultural capital to the classroom. And in those moments, I was just thinking about my own story as a first gen and the first person to go to college, and thinking about how my parents were so afraid of me speaking Spanish in school out of fear of me being placed in remedial courses or remediation. So they would always ask me to speak English. And I remember that, and how that was so conflicting, because here was this doctora teaching me something, like helping me unlearn what I was taught, you know. And it wasn't because my parents were doing it out of malice. They were really trying to protect me in that space. And I think really being authentic and being an academic mother has really been something that I've really tried to emulate with my students. I want to make sure that they know that they're affirmed and supported, that their cultural backgrounds matter, their identities matter, their personal pronouns matter, all of those things. And it has really changed the way in which I operate, where I don't feel like I'm, you know, teaching at students anymore. We're really learning together. And that has totally changed the dynamic in the community that's created in the room, just like she did for us. And we were a bunch of adults. And I just remember always being engaged, always being in little groups and little pods talking to each other, always standing up and doing these line activities. And I remember, like, I want this feeling, I want in my classroom. And I want to show that to pre-service teachers. And the pre-service teachers that I have now, it's so funny because I'm learning so much from them. And I don't know if it's it's kind of like the opposite. We're supposed to, you know, be teaching and kind of facilitating these spaces. And I'm like, wow, I'm learning so much from them and about how to continue to carry on the legacy that she left for me. So it's just really coming full circle. I never would have thought I would have been an adjunct professor anywhere. It was not in the goal or the plan at all. But she showed me that anybody could do it. And I think that was really powerful. So I'm really grateful to you, Doctora. And I'm really grateful to you, Carolina, because I see you doing the same thing at your school leading. And it's just really powerful. Just really powerful.
Thank you, Cassandra. That is incredibly inspiring. Thank you for sharing your story and for taking the time to be with us here today. We appreciate your honesty, openness, and passion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
And then Carolina, similarly for you, I'd like to ask you, are there things that you have learned from Eugenia that guide you in your current role as an assistant principal?
Yeah, I mean, I think as much as Eugenia has always been her authentic self, being a queer Latina, it's not always that's not something that's always like second nature, right? We're taught in our culture very early on to keep that separate, to keep that aside, to keep that private. And being in such a comfortable space and being everything that she is really allowed me to always be who I am in all of my spaces. So I've always been out at every single one of my work sites. It's not ever been something that I hide or shield or keep private. It's always scary, right? But I also have learned that because of this openness, it also allows me to take a different role with people at every school site that I've been at. And you know, I've talked about this mirror effect that I have with Eugenia because of her presence at USC, in a place where she kind of stands out a little bit. It also let me see myself in a different light. I could see myself in a place that I'm not normally supposed to be. I could see myself in an environment that maybe I don't belong in. And I had a very similar experience where my parents are like, well, you already made it. Like, you already went to college. Like, you did it. You got your master's. Like, that's more than any of us could have ever dreamed of. And I remember going back to my dad and we talked about, sorry, my dad passed away last year. So that's, and we talked about, you know, going back to school again. And he's like, for what? Like, you already did it twice. Like, that's, you're the pride of the family. Like, what more can I ask of you? And I was like, well, I'm ready to take the next step. And so, unfortunately, he passed before he got to watch me take the next step. Sorry.
No, that's okay, and Carolina. And I know that he, there were so many steps you've taken to get to where you are, and he's been part of them. When you talked about the pride of the family, it's you know, you were teaching, you were a coordinator, and I'm reminded. All of you here don't know this about Carolina, but she's amazing. So she's a coordinator, and she emails me. I think we might have been talking about it over one of our brunches. And she says, you know, I'm working as a coordinator and I'm looking at data with my teams. We're doing data teams. We're doing, you know, peer reviews. And I just have to tell my teachers, you can't keep doing the same and expect different results. You know, and you said that they talked about, we're just going to break it down more. And they're like, well, you're still doing the same thing and expecting different results. You said that to me, Carolina, and you said, I had to get them there to realize that we have to really reflect on our practice and think about how are the outcomes also informing the work that we're doing. And so to see how you have developed as a leader, I think, you know, he definitely saw that early on too, not only in your coordinator role, but even in your classroom. And every time you would come to me and say, oh, I'm a coordinator now. Oh, I'm looking to be at this next school where my son's going to go to school so we can be there together. And then when you said, I'm an AP now, it's like, that's awesome. Like, Carolina continues to move in the direction that you want to head to continue to impact more and more teachers and students. And so, you know, he didn't get to see that next step, but he did see your growth and the leader that you became in education for teachers. And I just love when you always tell me your stories, because I think, yes, Carolina, push teachers. Like, that's what we want. We want you to make them think and respond in ways that are attentive to students and their needs. So So I think that's
and
awesome.
as I continue to have these conversations with Dr. Mora-Flores, you know, that's what I do at my school, at my site. I have these conversations with my TAs. I have these conversations with teachers. I have these conversations about what's next. And, you know, what I have found is a lot of people don't have conversations with TAs about what's next. They're kind of navigating their school system by themselves.
Yeah.
And I talk to all of them, and I'm like, so I'm going to really enjoy a relationship for the next 5 years here on campus. And they were like, what do you mean the next 5 years? And I was like, well, because that's how long you should be here. In 5 years, you should be ready to take the next step. And it kind of reminds me constantly of these conversations that I have with Mora-Flores, where she's like, okay, that's great, you're here. So what are we doing? and what's coming? And those conversations, having them out loud, you know, really helps to guide a lot of young people that might not have guidance, that might not have anybody to dialogue about. A lot of our kids in community colleges get told to get an AA, only to find out that getting an AA doesn't mean you can transfer, right? And so, you know, that's one of the biggest impacts that has really molded me into who I am as a contributor on campus, right? Is that I'm not just this, I'm not just here to do my job, right? Because if she was just on campus to do her job, I would definitely, you know, not be where I'm at. And I would definitely not have been able to have a larger impact on the people that I've worked with and the relationship that she has modeled for me.
I just to piggyback off that, Carolina, what I thank you for that, but also I think that's the life of teachers, right? I mean, we talk so much about, you know, there's that saying like, oh, we're counselors and nutritionists and teachers and all this, but it's because the role we play in the life of a child is just amazing. And I shared at the beginning, personally, that was a big deal for me. When I was in high school, I felt like, and I tell my students in my language development courses this all the time, to tell this story, but I was allowed to just keep going and make and not really expect, the teachers didn't expect as much of me, so I kept getting these A's, right? I'm like, I'm getting A's, like I'm doing so good in school. My parents are so proud, I'm getting A's. And then I get to high school and I'm in AP history and I failed every essay I ever wrote. I kept failing every essay. And I'm like, why do I keep failing? I've been getting A's all through my classes. And I just didn't understand, how am I now failing? So that English teacher, she was a tough one, but she said, I need you to meet me after school. And she sat down with me and she said, you know what? You do not know how to write a thesis. And I said, well, why didn't anybody tell me that sooner? But I kept getting A's. I'm like, why doesn't anybody keep, and I would say, like, just keep it real with me. Like, let me know, like, what is it that I need to continue to improve? And when and so that happened, she helped me, got me through, passed my AP history test, went to UCLA, got really good grades, went on to Columbia, my master's, did really well and got good grades. And I get to my doctoral program at UCLA. And there's only 25 of us in our doctoral cohort. And everybody is these amazing leaders and have done so much. And I was 25 and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know if I have anything to contribute. We had to do leadership stories. And I said, I was captain of my basketball team and my volleyball team. And we had sergeants that led wars. And I was like, this is amazing. So I was the only student in that cohort that was asked to see a writing specialist. And I was so embarrassed. I started doing, coping strategies of, oh, we're doing peer review. I forgot my paper. That was back when all of you young folks, we had to print it out still and bring it in and grade each other's. And I was really embarrassed. And I thought, wait, I'm not a good writer. I don't know how to write like this. Well, this is crazy. When I got to my writing teacher, my writing support, she was amazing, Diane Durkin, she said, oh, she had never met me before. She had just read my writing and she said, oh, English isn't your first language. And I said, wait, how did you know that? And she said, oh, I can tell there are definitely some tendencies that I can tell you're drawing from another language in the way that you craft your language. And I thought, I have gone through undergrad, master's, now someone tells me that. So there was this like feeling you were talking about of like being really transparent and honest with the students to say, hey, here's some things that I'm noticing. I want to help you. And let's figure out, how do we get you where you want to be, or where we can continue to take you. So I had those moments and they were embarrassing because it made me feel less than what I should be. And then the next paper I turned into the professor, this is fun. I actually have the paper in my shed. This next paper I turned into my professor, he said, A, literate. That was it. Talk about feedback, Pasquale. We talked so much about feedback. That's all I got. That's all I got. Because I know we talked a lot about, feedback, and we did a study together. All I got was A, literate. And I thought, okay, is that a compliment or an insult? Like it was finally literate, or good job. But it just reminded me, and one of the things I talk to teachers about, because I do a lot of professional development with teachers too, is we have to be honest with our students in ways that, as Cassandra said, are caring in nature, but are setting extreme high expectations for students because they can reach them. So I feel like there were bumps along the way that maybe could have been easier for me had I had that honesty that told me, like, no, you're not quite there, but let me help you get there, as opposed to, oh, she's a first gen, Spanish is her first language. Let's just keep letting her kind of get by, because it was kind of odd. Like, how did we get through these great universities and still be at a place where I needed help? So, we always still need help, definitely. But it just seemed like it was late and it could have happened sooner. Sorry, Kellen went on with that one for a little bit.
Oh, no. Thank you for elaborating and for your insightful and thoughtful comments. So we are going to switch gears a little bit and answer some questions that were submitted from the audience. As a reminder, please submit any questions you may have to the chat box. So the first question for you, Eugenia, what do you want your legacy of impact to be?
That's a high-level question there. Okay. I think I want it to be connected to what Cassandra and Carolina have both really helped me see in the work that I've done, and that is connections and expectations, and leaving a legacy of students always making that part of their teaching, always making it part of their life goals, is that no matter how high we get, Carolina's an AP, still make those connections. She's talking to the TAs, she's telling the TAs, hey, you think about being a teacher? Like, how can I, or what are your goals? Like, where else do you want to see yourself? It doesn't have to be teaching. Where do you want to go? I think it's leaving students with that they always find ways to make those connections and to hold expectations for students that meet and exceed what they want for themselves, and guiding that path for them. And so I feel like I hope to do that. And so I get really inspired when I see and hear from students that they're doing that at whatever level they are in education. All are equally impactful. And so, teachers and the teachers that have left recently, I know, Kellen, you are one of our MAT students too. So even in your work, whether that's teaching or in another space, are we making connections? Are we holding each other to high expectations and expecting the best of everybody that's around us? I teach an undergraduate freshman course at USC, and the course is bilingual bicultural experiences of Latinx students in the US, or Latinx people in the US. And I get math majors, engineering majors, communications majors, media, like all these different majors. I haven't really anybody because we don't have an undergraduate major. And I usually only get about 1 or 2 students interested in teaching in the future. And one thing that I put on the final exam is I always put a question about what from this class will inform the work you do in your future profession. Like, how will you make connections between what we came to learn about this particular group and how you come to understand diverse groups? And how will that impact when you become a mathematician or an engineer or a doctor? And so trying to help inspire that they see connections that they can make and how they can connect with people and diversity in ways that can contribute to their own profession, whatever that might be.
Great, thank you. And so we don't have any more questions. So thank you, Eugenia, Carolina, Cassandra, for your openness and your willingness to engage in such insightful and thoughtful conversations. And finally, thank you to everyone who attended today's event. Thank you for your support of Rossier, which directly benefits students and faculty like Eugenia and enables them to continue their impactful work. Fight on.
Thank you for coming tonight. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Carolina, for being here with me.
Anytime.
Along the way.